Hi there. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar and would like to ask you just to give a couple minutes for anybody that's running late, and we'll begin shortly. And the topic uh, will be a fully cloud-based deployment and the steps that need to be taken towards its implementation, configuration, management, and providing maximum uptime and accessibility for your virtualized environment. Now, once again, my name is Dmitro Kamenko. I'm a solutions engineer here at StarWind, and since clouds have recently become the talk of the town, and on today's webinar, I just wanted to discuss the possibilities, benefits, and challenges that come with the deployment of a multi-geographic and fault-tolerant storage in the cloud. Now, for starters, the most reasonable thing to do would be looking into the possible use cases for its configuration. Now, some of the use cases as will be mentioned further down the road. As an example would be some startups that do not have any concrete requirements as to the resources of their future environment, um, and other companies that would like to either migrate, make that transition from on-premise to the cloud, and scale out. Now, other than meeting the service level agreement requirements of the solution, and high availability has one of the biggest challenges for providers, and especially when choosing from one of the many services that can be used to improve the availability of a service, such as checkpointing, load balancing, and redundancy. A fully cloud-based deployment would put a check mark next to all of the points mentioned above. And until today's date, the requirements like on-demand self-service, broad network access, resource pooling are the main components that just can't seem to lose their popularity level. Now, with all that put in the scope of consideration, let's make an attempt to weigh out the pros and cons of a cloud infrastructure when comparing it to a, believe it or not, legacy on-premise infrastructure. Now, several other points that I wanted to bring to your attention. Now, the comparison of a on-premise environment versus the cloud would be something that would be reasonable, I believe, since on-premise assumes a fair amount of hardware, electricity bills, cost cutters, service, maintenance, you name it. They've got it, taking into account the temperature that rises within the data center. And cloud would once again have the upper hand in that comparison. Now, the second aspect would be the cost of the hardware, especially in the case if the resource allocation of your future environment is yet to be found out. And once again, the hardware choice or decision that needs to be made within several steps would be quite cumbersome and difficult. Now, once again, requirements which will rise in the process of its uptime may vary from beginning to end. So, end of life would also be something to wrap your head around. So, depending on the type of hardware you purchase, you never know how long it's going to serve you for and how it will be supported, serviced, or replaced. Um, Especially if you don't have any hardware available or the budget is quite small. Once again, cloud will come to the rescue. Competition in regards to uh, hardware vendors. So many offer lower prices, some some discounts, end of year. But once again, they all are similar, and it makes the choice even more difficult. The third aspect will be the budget, timeline, and the management aspect of maintaining the solution. So, budget-wise, cloud can assist you in uh, creating a budget or coming at least to a certain amount that would uh, once again satisfy your requirements, the performance, and provide all the resources for that cost. Now, timeline would once again be one something that would be important, and it would take into account the amount of time that it would take to deploy the infrastructure. Now, the management aspect would most likely be one of the most important aspects since uh, managing its uptime and having it configured properly would be one of the most important things to look over, and finding some qualified staff would be quite difficult, and especially having them on call, for example. So, four would be finding the answers to your questions, which is quite difficult nowadays, for starters, because the throughput of that information is quite high, and quite difficult to differentiate some useful information from useless information. And the fifth aspect is the solution demonstration, which is also quite an important aspect, just to get hands-on experience or a solid resemblance of something that will be put to everyday use, and that's also something that we've got you covered for. Now, when comparing the outcome of a future deployment and in the process of making a choice between the on-premises or cloud deployment, once again, a more detailed description of the considerations that would be need to take into account would include protection from downtime. And based on our experience and over the years, we can clearly state that complete withdrawal of any doubts of infrastructure downtime is completely impossible. And the reasons for that would be some of the reasons that would directly affect your business continuity, and some of them would include power outages, network throughput or availability, along with support and maintenance. So if you manage to overcome the first two, the last one could possibly turn out as a single point of disaster. Now, in other words, a single point of failure could always be something you were never prepared for. And that's also great to have somebody that will be prepared for that. Now, the second aspect would be eliminating the loss of revenue. Now, for example, let's take a case where, once again, a startup was looking into accommodating the requirements of investing into an infrastructure without any particular requirements on hand. Now, in this case, the odds of hitting a roadblock after investigating into a non-premise solution are fairly high. Now, the solution must turn out to be the issue. Now, an additional aspect, simplifying infrastructure maintenance is once again something that many take for granted, and since the complications and something that Silicon Valley would even fail to achieve at times, the process of configuring and managing the redundancy of an infrastructure would definitely not be something that you can trust your animal with. So no cables, no noise, and no self-rolling electricity bills is something to look forward to when implementing a cloud-based deployment. And maintenance cost of a cloud infrastructure would definitely have the upper hand here. Now, an additional aspect would be achieving maximum flexibility. And just as the case mentioned previously, some infrastructures never have been deployed previously and may require some recalculation of its resource demand. And even in this case, the possibility of pinpointing the most beneficial instance types is simply a matter of time. Now, the last aspect, the improvement of resiliency and agility, would also be something to look over, and the resiliency provided by a cloud infrastructure would be limitless. Now, a cross-region replicated storage volume along with the resources would be the best option for configuring a highly fault-tolerant environment. And now, one of the methods which I wanted to bring to your attention today would be a minimal configuration of such a fault-tolerant environment. Now, on today's webinar, we'll actually focus on the best practice of deploying a fault-tolerant environment in AWS. And as you can see in the diagram, the minimal configuration of StarWind vSAN in Azure will start with 2 nodes, and there will be no requirement of external witness. Even if you do have a VPC running somewhere, it would be possible for you to utilize that VPC as a witness and eliminate any data transition costs. no synchronization will take place there. And the network backend that will be responsible for the synchronization of data between the instances can be represented by just a mere two single gigabit network interfaces. Now, the key here is the proper configuration of VPC and successfully deploying a Microsoft failover cluster on AWS. Now, two of the methods of achieving that would be based on deploying a VPC in different availability zones and implementing routing tables, or deploying VPC once again in different availability zones and using peering connection to communicate. So for the purpose of today's demonstration, we're actually pre-configured two VPCs based on Windows Server Data Center and installed them with StarWind Virtual SAN. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and briefly introduce you to the management of our solution before I go ahead and do a rundown of its configuration. Now, as you can see on the screen here, this is the StarWind Web Management Console, which is a role-based deployment and is accessible from the browser within any client on the same network. Now, as you can see, we've actually grouped different environments and scenarios for management simplicity, and the management console can be beneficial to you in multiple ways. So as you can see, these are the two hosts, the VPCs, which we've pre-configured and are currently up and running. And we've created 4 StarWind devices and replicated them in between the hosts. The management network can be used for monitoring the performance of your VPCs, for example. Yeah, bear with me here, please. So it's rush hour. Okay, that's strange. Just connect that. Yeah, well, yeah, the benefits range from monitoring the performance of the VPCs to reviewing the logs, some events which may have taken place at the moment of your absence, extending the size of the replicated volume on the fly, looking into the current status of the synchronization process, and receiving notifications of accessibility or limited accessibility of a single or several hosts, which are responsible for synchronization of storage in between. Yeah, so let me just double check the current status, and as you can see on the right pane, we have once again the option to enter maintenance mode, modify replication interfaces, which are responsible for migration of data, somewhat of a QoS service, which would allow you to either improve the speed of processing of client requests or synchronization, and once again extending the size of the replicated volume along with all the details provided on the right hand here. So with all that taken into account, let's just go ahead and take a look at our configuration, which is based on 4 running instances, 2 in each different region. And one of them would be the Active Directory for a specific region, and the second would be a storage controller, which plays a vital role in the provisioning of storage and the configuration of the replication in between. So as you can see, Windows based, this one's North Virginia, and the second should be Oregon. So with that taken into account, we've also configured IPs, elastic IPs for accessing those VMs, of course. And we've have 6 volumes associated with those VPCs, and are provisioning the storage of each to replicate in between. Now, once that's done, we have then configured a failover cluster and utilized the networks and separated the communication in between them, between cluster use and client, just to eliminate any split brain or data rot, and disks that were replicated have been assigned as cluster shared volume, some as file server, used for SQL server also, and the last has been assigned as a virtual witness and quorum. So once the nodes have been validated along with the cluster, we've then placed the roles on top of the cluster shared volumes, or the volumes replicated by StarWind and associated to each type. And in order for me to simulate a real-world environment where a single host would fail, I'm simply going to go off screen here and reboot one of the hosts, which is currently the owner node. So this should, in result, initiate an automated failover procedure with no human intervention, and once again bring the roles to a running status, and once again have them accessible to any clients or any type of your mission critical VMs would eliminate any possibility of their downtime. So that's that for the webinar. Once again, feel free to address any questions you may have in the chat, and I'll do my best to have them answered for you. Okay, that's a good question. So, is the synchronization or replication limited to two hosts only? No, it actually isn't, and it would once again be possible for you to configure replication of storage in between 64 hosts and implement a grid deployment. Once again, would provide quite some stable ground for the uptime of your infrastructure and would not limit you to any particular region. So in the case of a failure of either of the hosts, it will be possible for you to migrate from one region to the other. What will be the performance? Well, the performance would be directly dependent on the performance of the VPC. So based on the configuration, it would be possible for you to either scale up or down when needed. So okay, so I'd like to thank everybody for attending our webinar today, and once again, feel free to address any questions or requests or possible improvements which we can make to the corresponding department. So, thank you for your attention. Have a great day.